Great. Thanks everyone for joining us today for another PLP episode. Today's focus is also parenting phases, and we had some really good questions come in from people that have watched our parenting phases episodes. So we wanted to take some time to put those questions to the group and talk about them. So our first question is about a teenager. And so the question is, my teenager often argues when reminded of the rules, especially about curfews. How can we have a constructive conversation about rules and expectations without turning it into a power struggle?
It's a great question. Do you guys mind if I jump in? I have three teenagers, so I've had some experiences here. So with the way that we've handled it in the past, with my oldest, he's 17, he's always wanting a little more. And what we try to do is, basically tell him that, these are the rules. This is when you're going to come home. If you want to have a conversation about it, then we can discuss it tomorrow, because typically this happens right before he's going to go out. And I don't think it's very productive because he tends to be somewhat like emotional and we don't want it to get heated. But at the same time, we don't want to change the rules just because he's arguing on his own behalf, a few minutes before he's going to leave. At the same time, I also don't want to punish my son advocating for himself. So I try to set it up so that we can, today you're going to come home at this time. Obviously, you know what happens when you're late. We have some consequences there that have been very effective because he tends to be, always 5 to 10 minutes right before the deadline. But I like I said, I want him to be able to advocate for himself, and at the same time, I want to make sure that it's a conversation we can have where it's not so emotional at that moment in time. So we tend to discuss it the next day, and some of the arguments that come up are that some of the other teenagers get to stay out later, and so we listen to his arguments, and there have been times where we have extended the amount of time that he can stay out based off his age and grade level. But I think it's important, like I said, not to punish, your child advocating for themselves, but at the same time, it's also nice to table the conversation at a later time where there's not so much emotion involved, especially from the team, coming from the teenager.
I was going to ask if sometimes you bend the rules or depending on what the situation is, but usually is there like if you know something's coming up, like, I don't know, a school dance or something where there might be a longer time, do you like have him try to ask like a few days before, a week before, or for planning purposes, that kind of
It's
thing?
interesting. There's a lot of graduations going on this time of the year, so or graduation parties. So what we found is that these graduation parties have been spread out over the summer so that people aren't having their graduation parties at the same time. So he's been actually pretty good about asking for an extension prior. So and that's what we've talked about with him before, is don't ask us for an extension. I mean, does this sound familiar, you guys?
Yes.
Don't ask for an
Absolutely.
extension right before the deadline. That's what we do with this is what we do at our organization is, if you have a report that's due and you want an extension, don't ask me at the time of the deadline. Give me 72 hours notice at least. So it's the same thing with my son, because he's the one that's always asking for, an extended curfew, but he's really good at, approaching us a few days before, letting us know it's so-and-so's graduation party. This is where he's going to be, you know, if, if he can get the extension, and we usually approve it when there's certain special circumstances. Same thing with like the homecoming dance and prom. We've extended that as well.
I mean, that's such a good life skill though, too, to like just be proactive, number one, and like look forward. I mean, it's like obviously he can use it in so many other situations, but it's not just about, the curfew.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Monica. It's about planning and problem solving. And
Mhm.
I just recently had somebody that started working for us. He's in his 20s and he was going through training. And he said, "What advice would you give 20-year-olds, that are starting to work for you at CUSP, but also that are out there, looking for work?" And I said, do the simple things right.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of looked at me and I said, the simple things are showing up on time. And showing up on time is a few minutes, if not 5 to 10 minutes before the time you're supposed to be there.
Right.
Make eye contact, smile, social skills are everything. Say please and thank you. Those are the simple things. And I think that those simple things are almost like 70 or 80% of what you can do and accomplish and move up in an organization. Because social skills is most everything. I mean, you still have to have knowledge of the subject matter, and you still have to be able to apply what it is that you know. But the simple things, get them right. And so those are the things that we've worked on with our kids is making sure they say please, they say thank you, they show up on time, whether it's there's a curfew at home or my son is a busboy, making sure that he shows up early to work and he does his job right. And again, it's when you're a busboy, you're still dealing with people, not just your fellow employees, but the customers that are coming into the restaurant. So that's been something that we've tried to push, and I think that again, like you said, Monica, I think it'll be very beneficial if you start working on these skills at a young age. There's so many people right now, and from my experience, and I was talking to a couple of other people that run different types of organizations, that they struggle right now with people that are in their 20s, between 20 and 30 years of age, where people aren't showing up on time for interviews, they're not showing up on time for work, and it's very interesting, and people are having to deal with this struggle of getting the people that work for them to show up on time. And a lot of people that I've talked to, they're saying like, we're just letting people go now. We just can't do this anymore. And so
Yeah.
I don't want my son or my sons or daughter performing in such a way when they're working for somebody else.
Curfew extensions would be a reinforcer. And we talk a lot about reinforcers in PLP, and we have a whole episode dedicated to reinforcers that you should definitely go watch if this doesn't sound familiar. But looking for behaviors that you can use a curfew extension as a reinforcer. So if you know prom's coming up and they haven't complained about a curfew in 3 days, that could probably be a really good thing to reinforce and say, you know what? You didn't ask me for 3 days. I'm going to give you a curfew extension. My parents used to, if I showed up 5 days in a row on time when I was supposed to, then I could earn a curfew extension. And so
Mm,
thinking of
That's
that
good.
as a reinforcer about the things you want to see can also maybe help you avoid a little bit of the argument and the back and forth.
yeah, I
That's a
think
good
that's
one.
those are the antecedent manipulations, right? Before anything happens, what can we do that's a little different? And then also the consequence manipulations, given what you're talking about with reinforcement.
Okay, so our next question is about a 14-year-old. The parent shares that this 14-year-old is struggling with peer pressure and making some poor choices. How can they use the coaching phase and coach them through these situations without feeling like they're being really controlling?
Oof, that is a great question. That's another great question. I want to give you guys an opportunity. I have a 13, 15, and 17-year-old children, two boys and a girl. I'd love to hear from, Stephanie and Monica as well, but um, part of what we've experienced when you have, whether it's a teenager or a young adult, we are the average of the five people we hang out with. And that's what I've shared with my children. It doesn't matter whether they're teenagers, young adults, you know, people that are married and that are completely already established in their career. I just believe that you are the average of the five people you hang out with. And so I try to tell my children, my teenagers, like, look around, like, the goal is, enjoy yourself, have a good time. It depends on the type of poor decisions they're making, but if it has to do with smoking and alcohol, what we try to do with the coaching phase is explain to them how bad it is for you, especially because they're all athletes. And so if you want to be very good at baseball or football or surfing, then people that smoke and people that drink aren't going to have the same opportunities as people that don't. So that's how we try to explain it. But I think, in terms of you're the average of the 5 people you hang out with, and I tell my friends that as well. And I remind myself of it. If you hang out with people that are very athletic and they're always on the go, or they're always like, career driven, then you're going to find yourself doing similar things. If you hang out with people that are smoking and drinking, and, you become the average of the 5 people you hang out with. I firmly believe that.
It's interesting that you say that, because I'm starting to have those conversations with Harrison. He's turning 13 this year, but what I've noticed is when he hangs out with, like, the whole average of the people that you're with. So when he's around kids that don't do sports, that don't hang around, they're not bad kids. They're not athletic. They don't do after school extracurricular activities. Like, he tends to not want to do what he typically would want to do. Like, I don't want to go to jiu-jitsu today. I don't want to go to football practice today. But when he's hanging around the kids that have those sports and those activities, there's zero complaints about him actually going to do those things. And so I've brought that to his attention. And so I've noticed that when you're with, and there's nothing wrong with either group of friends, they just do different things.
Right.
But I brought that to his attention of like, hey, well, these people don't have to be home at a certain time because they don't do sports, so why do I have to come home, and so having these conversations. But it's very interesting, the shift in his behavior and his thinking, depending on which group of friends he's hanging out with and what he wants to do. And so I also have to have those conversations with him. Like, if you want to be, I don't know, like, better at, football or better at jujitsu, like, you have to put in the practice, you have to put in the work. And I find myself sending him like memes and like Instagram reels of like these things of like, to make a good athlete or to be a better student or whatever. Like, you have to put in the work. These are behaviors that help you get to. So I'm starting to have these conversations with him because, he's turning 13, he's going to middle school. And so it's vastly different than being 10, 11 years old. And him becoming into his own person and helping guide him in the right way of what I would, what he wants to do. And sometimes it's in those split moments where he's like, I don't know if this is what I want to do, but it's all based on who he's hanging around with in that moment. And so just kind of having those open conversations with what his expectations or what he would like to do, versus like whatever his friends are doing. It's very interesting how it shifts around this age.
For me, I tend to over talk about something because like I really want them to understand, especially my oldest, who's only 10. And I've like had to really learn to just less is more. And I also, though, like Stephanie saying, I'll try to find things that aren't me saying it, but somebody that she either admires or like my daughter's into gymnastics. So it's like, I'll find something from Simone or like, and I try to like send those things just so she can hear it or see it from somebody else, because I've realized that I'll over talk certain things. But the other thing is like, also like with this one specifically is like talking about goals, which is sometimes hard for this age as well. But what are their goals? And then how do you accomplish those things? So instead of talking at them or telling them what they shouldn't be doing, like sitting them down, kind of on a regular basis, but asking like what their goals are and like how would they achieve those goals. So I'm sure most of their goals aren't just hanging out with their friends 24/7, hopefully. So sometimes that kind of will help guide them as you're, coaching them towards the right direction.
You guys heard the really great stories about the parents that also kind of create the easy out and the safe space for peer pressure situations. There's the story of the dad where if his kid texts him a certain emoji, it means no questions asked. I just need you to call and pretend like I'm in trouble, so I have to go home. And I had that rule, like if I called my parents and wanted to be picked up, there was no questions asked. They just knew that like I was in a situation I didn't want to be in. So like having those conversations, creating that space and giving them a way to get out of it is probably really helpful in that situation too. And probably feels really great for you guys as a parent when your kid utilizes that problem solving as well and sees you as a safe place.
I like that. I really like that. Yeah, it gives the teenager an opportunity to save face, right? And at the same time, you have this trusting bond with your son or your daughter, and they feel comfortable, asking you for help. I really like that. I'm going to try to implement something like that at our place. Although I think my oldest is kind of like he's a little more comfortable and confident with expressing what he will and won't do. I think it's my middle son that would probably be able to use that more so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've done that, and I've shared that with my son, and he's actually said that, Mom, remember you said that if I was honest and open about these things, I wouldn't get in trouble. And it's not big stuff at this age, but at least he's understanding that if he brings it up, or rather than me finding out or him getting in trouble for doing a certain thing, like he's the one that initiates that, then there is no questions. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be consequences put forward on these things, but I'm not going to be angry with him because he was in a situation or talks about certain things or did something, because it's like I want to have that openness and not that fear of like, because I remember as a kid having that fear from my parents of like always getting in trouble and it didn't matter what I did. And I didn't like that because I felt like there's a little bit more of maybe giving into that peer pressure or doing things that maybe, you shouldn't be doing because for whatever reason, and then hiding it, and it just gets even worse. So I feel like that's a really good thing to like let your kids know too. It's open and honest, and it goes both ways, and it helps them be a little bit more open and honest with you. Doesn't mean that there's no consequences, but
yeah. But I think being available as a help versus like somebody that's looked at as like, I'm just going to get in trouble if I tell them, that's like a big, I mean, and yeah, like you said, it doesn't mean that there aren't consequences or a discussion later on, but in the moment, it's like you want to be the person they go to, not the person they're afraid of, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
Agreed.
Thanks, guys. Yeah. Okay, so this parent, we got a lot of teenager questions today. So our parents with teenagers are really seeking assistance. But this is another teenager, and she shares that he's very private. He doesn't open up easily. How can she build trust and encourage open communication during the sort of coaching and directing phase?
I can talk a little bit about this. I feel going into like teenager, middle school age is new world for me and new emotions. And I very much feel like it's like inside out. Like a lot of these different emotions are coming in and he doesn't even know how to navigate them. And I remember being a teenager and not necessarily understanding how to navigate them. And the one thing that is not the pushing and the constant like asking questions and you want to find out, but the more that you ask, the less that they're going to open up. And so what I have found that with my son, when I do, sometimes things will come up in the most random times. We'll driving in the car and he will open up without me asking too many questions. And then then I know that I can start maybe asking a few more questions. So I find it in not a sit down and have a talk type of structured situation, because I feel like they're just less likely to like say anything and nothing's wrong, I'm fine, versus taking little opportunities where it's just more of a natural family interaction, and going on walks, going on, car rides, or even when you're sitting down and watching a show, all of a sudden like things will come up that he can relate to in a show. And then it opens up that dialogue and you're not badgering and asking like, how are you feeling and what's going on? Because as a teenager, that's the last thing that they're going to, and I have a pretty good relationship with my son, but that's not what he does not want me to badger. And so I have to find little nooks and crannies of when I can like kind of get in there and see what's going on. And then he'll open up, but it's also like a give and take relationship. I can't push too much and I can't ask too many questions. And it's like a gas and a brake at the same time. Like I have to really figure out what's happening.
So being a very good listener, basically.
Yeah. And just listening. And just listening and not hounding with too many questions, because then I think that is a turnoff for the age and you want to find out as a parent. But yeah, being a good listener, and then it just gets them to open up more and you can kind of get in with a few questions and wait and just listen a little bit more.
Dr. Meyer, you mentioned in a previous episode that like sometimes it's not always the most convenient time when they want to open up, but like deciding that that is the convenient time and stopping whatever you're doing if you can
Yeah.
to really spend that time with them and have that conversation, even
Yeah.
if you're doing something you might feel that's important.
Yeah, like working from home sometimes, they want to share something with you. And so it's like you're in the middle of something, especially when you're running numbers or you're, collecting data or trying to interpret graphs. And then they approach you. It's like you want to welcome that every single time. The other thing that, Stephanie, when you were sharing some of the strategies that you've used and being a good listener is just dinner time. Like, just asking them a couple basic questions like, oh, how was your day? And like, tell me a couple cool things that happened today. We used to do it that way. Now it's like they just kind of share and it opens up, opportunities for different types of conversations. But, that's like the group with the three kids. And then, sometimes it's just like you said, Stephanie, earlier, watching a movie and then they'll come up with something and you're like, okay, let's pause the movie and let's have a conversation.
Yeah, not
But
the most opportune time, but you're going to take
yeah,
it because it doesn't
yeah,
happen very often. You're like,
uh,
pause. Okay, what's up, buddy? Let's talk about it. And it could be a
take what you
short
can
thing or it could
get.
be a long
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
take what you can get for sure.
I think that's from that book that we read before, Untangled.
Mm,
That I think one of the things I believe I took away from that book, or Dr. Meyer, I think you might have said it before, was that just waiting for that opportunity and just always being like available as much as you can. So as soon as you hear, something to like start that conversation up more, really trying to just grasp onto those.
yeah.
Um,
Catches off guard a little bit, and then you're backpedaling. I've found that out where I'm like, well, I was not expecting that, but okay, let me see what answer I can give you for this, and
Yeah.
we just go with it, and then you're like, oh, did I say the right thing?
Well, if they keep coming back and asking for advice, then you are
It must have
most
been.
likely saying the right thing. So,
that's true.
Okay, last question. So this is for a 5-year-old. So our 5-year-old seems confused about the different rules we have at home versus rules at the playground. The playground rules obviously are a bit more strict than rules at home. And so she's wondering how to help her 5-year-old understand the different rules and the different settings.
I was thinking about that question when I was reviewing the questions prior to the start of the Q&A today. And I was thinking I probably would need some specific examples, like, how are the rules different at home versus out on the playground? So, like,
Well,
did they give any examples or Monica jump in? Yeah.
I mean, this is the one that when I was reading this question as well, this is what I first thought about. And it was actually at the same location, like the school playground, because at where we live, we can go and play on the school playground, even when school's not in session. So like in the summer, and I'll let my kids run up the slides and, play on the equipment in a different way than when it's school time and what they're allowed to do. And
Mm,
so my reasoning usually is I'm allowing you to do that because there's less kids. I'm responsible just for you right now, or those things. But I also say you can ask the school what is their reasoning as to why. And they might give you a better explanation. But usually I could try to say, because there's too many kids, it's not safe if some kids are going down while some kids are going up, things like that. That's like the first thing I thought about. But always like advocating for them to ask what the reasoning is behind those rules, I think is a good thing, because you can only say what the reasoning is behind your rules. So hopefully you have a good reason.
Yeah, and I think some examples were like at home, all toys are an option. At the park, people bring their own toys, so you can't grab any toy on the playground. At home, like there's not as much washing hands and worrying about germs, but at the park, like, yeah, you probably shouldn't put that item in your mouth. Like, I don't want you to use the drinking fountain. Those are like sort of some of the examples.
And it's such a hard age too at 5 because it's not always clear to them. So like Monica, in your examples, I think it's very clear of like, you're just my one, or that, there's not a ton of kids, and so safety. And then I think like with a 5-year-old, like if it has something to do with like sharing, like germs would be one of just having a very open conversation about, at home, it's only your toys. It's only your, touching them at the playground. It's outside and there's, other people and we don't know about, like you don't want to share germs. And so, and I think like having more like, I think that's a good age to actually start having more of those open conversations at like a level that they can understand, when you're using like certain words and certain language with them, rather than just trying to say, well, that's just the way it is, but actually having very concrete examples of, like if you don't wash your hands, like what happens at home, we have to wash our hands when we come outside, and because we don't want to get sick and we don't bring germs inside the house. With toys, you could even just, say, well, you can ask, but they don't have to share. But at home, it's only your toys, and you don't have to ask to play with your toys because it's just your toys. But at least they can try to advocate for themselves at the park and ask the other kid if they could play, and then the other kid has the option to say no. And then what they can do if the kid does say no, and and teach them how to problem solve that way.
I mean, and it's really great that they're asking and noticing the differences and like asking why, because I feel like maybe back in the day when I was growing up, it's like you just followed the rules just because. And if you ask, sometimes the reason was just because I said so. Whereas now we're kind of shifting a little bit. I mean, some good, some bad, but shifting so that, I mean, it's okay to ask why. You might not get the answer you want or the answer you fully understand, but asking why you have to do or not do something. And sometimes, like I will say with my kids, I'll be like, I can't explain it right now. Just follow it. We'll talk about it later. Sometimes we have to curb it because in the moment, it's not the right time to go into a full explanation. But I mean, I think it's a good thing that they're noticing the differences and asking those why, so that they could, give solutions or problem solve or figure out if it's something that they really want, how can they, work around it.
Thinking about those
like it.
parenting phases too, like when a parent takes a kid to a park, oftentimes it can feel like this is my break time. I get to sit on the bench and you get to be over here and enjoy yourself. But you might need to spend some time in the teaching phase. You might need to actually go out and play and spend some time with them and model and work on those learning opportunities like in the moment. And then maybe by the third or fourth time you go to the park, then it gets to be your break. Then you get to sit on the bench and then you get to kick back a little bit. Because sometimes when they're hearing it after the fact, they're already upset and they're being told no, and they might not be able to receive that information. But if you're in the teaching phase and really doing it in the moment, they might be a little bit more receptive.
Even like,
so true.
Like on your way to the park, having those conversations, like if you know that in the past it's been an issue. I remember with my son when he was younger, we would go over like scenarios from previous of like, what are you going to do if this happens? What are you going to do if this happens? And if this happens, and just so that way we're role rehearsing those, because they've been in the past, they've been issues, and we're role playing and going over it. And then in hopes that that is more of a pre-teaching or an antecedent manipulation to when he's actually in those situations and we've already talked about it. So that's also been very helpful. And I've actually recommended that to like a lot of my parents that I work with, of if you know that there's a problem, there's an issue with anything, having those conversations before you enter that situation again. But then also being close enough in that situation if maybe the pre-teaching didn't work and now you actually have to go and model and do what you need to do, and then do it all over again the next time.
Very good. Those were great questions. So in the future, if hopefully this helped, if you have any comments, please let us know. And if you have any questions, please let us know as well. And we'll try to pick your question so that we can answer it here with our PLP staff. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it and hope to see you guys soon. Take care.